Today, a story that should concern every taxpayer in this country, and yet, for months, you heard almost nothing about it. A security breach that cost the taxpayer about $2.5 million, delayed disclosure, conflicting statements from officials and the political establishment, and now suddenly we are told everything is under control. Really? Is everything under control? Because if this is normal, as some in the government suggest, then we have a much bigger problem than a single incident. If senior officials can't recognize a cyber threat, if systems can be compromised without immediate detection, and if the public only finds out months later, then what exactly is secure? And here's the uncomfortable question. Is this just one isolated breach, or are we looking at a system that is far more vulnerable than anyone is willing to admit? Joining me now is Asela Waidyalankara, a cybersecurity professional who has been warning about these risks for years. Asela, good to have you with us.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a timely topic and very important, and thank you for, as a network, spending time discussing it. Because as you've seen, I've been a strong advocate for cybersecurity in this country for a long time, and I'm glad that it's getting the attention it deserves, although circumstances are not ideal.
Asela, we hear that institutions like the Finance Ministry and the Treasury Department are manned by the best and the brightest of professionals in the country. But what makes them such easy targets?
Perhaps best and the brightest in what they do. But if they don't receive the adequate training, capacity building, awareness of the complexities around cybersecurity, they are a soft target. It doesn't matter your level of intellect, your professional maturity, because we've seen time and time again professionals, including cybersecurity professionals, get targeted with sophisticated schemes. Could it be phishing? It could be other schemes where people are going after their credentials. So that being said, yes, perhaps they are seasoned bureaucrats. They are very good at their jobs, and I don't doubt it. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's a different discipline, it's a different area, and there are things you have to be conscientious about. And if you're not told to look out for those things, if you are not careful to spot those things, there may be situations which they're facing right now. We are facing those situations.
Asela, tell me, is this lack of training or sheer incompetence?
See, Lahiru, if you haven't faced situations of this nature, you do not know what to do. And that gap in understanding and response leads to sometimes us doing something like this. I'm not saying that they did that, but perhaps something like this. This is why in the corporate world or in other parts of the world, we have something called a red teaming exercises. Red teaming exercises is you get professionals to come up with scenarios to breach an organization. Actually breach. You don't tell people inside what's happening, but you tell them, listen, figure out a way to breach into that organization. You have phishing simulations. Even organizations, private sector organizations in Sri Lanka, a few of the large groups, they run phishing simulations, which is basically you get someone like me, there's tools for that. We write specific phishing emails, some very obvious, some that looks very official, and we keep sending it and we test it out and we see who clicks on it. And if there's people who click on it, we identify those people, we give them a training and we put them out again if they click on it. So we continue this process. So they understand that there is a threat out there. Thirdly, you have to have technical reviews. So like I said, if you don't know the gamut of something like this, and if you're unfamiliar with what's happening in a situation, you may not know what to do. Now, finally, there's something called tabletop exercises, which we do for the corporates. Tabletop exercise is very simple. We get the top management or senior management in an organization and we throw hypothetical scenarios at them. You are getting hacked now. What do? You've lost half of your email server. Now tell me, senior management, what's their playbook? What are you going to do? So once you get people in this mindset to go through these scenarios in their mind, when it does actually happen, it's become second nature. because you've gone through these scenarios. So I feel when I hear all of this, and whatever we know so far is in public domain, we don't know what's behind the curtain of public domain. But that being said, what I do understand is there is a certain gap in the preparedness, how prepared you are in terms of to handle a situation like this. That much is clear. So that means your incident response, your preparation, your cybersecurity drills, there is a gap. So that's, in my professional opinion, that's where I would point to. And it's, to be fair to this particular organization, it's not only them. That's prevalent in entire government, whole of government at times.
So let me ask you this. Is this really just limited to finance ministry? You've already touched on that, but I want to push this a bit further. A lot of people are asking whether this is just a tip of the iceberg. It's been a couple of months since this happened, and only now we are seeing complaints being lodged with the Criminal Investigation Department and other authorities with support from both local and international agencies. So, do you suspect there could be more than that what we are not seeing yet? And secondly, what kind of signal does an incident like this send to outsiders, to investors, to partners, people who are looking at the country's system and security? Does it raise concerns about vulnerabilities?
That's a very scary question because, and I'll tell you why. It points fundamentally to having very little awareness of alerts, of suspicious behavior. Now, generally, when we talk about cybersecurity or digital transformation, there are three elements to it. There is people, there is process, and there's technology. So, in essence, when something goes wrong, one of those three pillars should get activated. It should either technology, meaning something should throw you an alert. A tool should pick up saying, okay, this looks suspicious. Something in your emails should flag saying this sender doesn't look legit or something like that. That's a technology part of it. Then there's the process part of it. We have, for example, in banks, something called the 4 eyes principle, meaning that a fresh set of eyes looks at your work or your approvals or what you're looking at. So to ensure there's a double verification. And then there's people. People should have the awareness, the presence of mind, the training, and the knowledge to understand when something's not right. So when I look at this situation and what the question you asked, the fact that an external agency, and again, this is just conjecture because this is what we know so far, that an external agency told us that something is amiss. Therein triggered the internal investigation worries me because that indicates at a fundamental level that there is no internal alert mechanism between those three pillars, either people or process or technology. So that warrants investigation because, like you said, could there be more? I'm not saying there could be the case, but could there be more, which is a logical question, which is why a situation like this demands a very thorough digital forensics investigations where you go through the network, you go through the machines, you go through the communication, you go through the email server, just like you would go through a crime scene. In one of those CSI movies, you say we do something called digital forensics, where you go through all of that in a fine-tooth comb and you find the answers to that question. So right now, we don't know that. And that aspect worries me.
Let me ask you this directly. What is your honest reaction to the government's response to this entire situation? We are hearing mixed signals. Some officials are downplaying it, saying cybersecurity breaches like this are common in countries. Others are outright denying that anything serious happened. At the same time, the government has appointed an investigative committee. So, how do you read this response overall?
What's my reaction is I continue to worry because this is not the first high-profile cybersecurity incident we had. Heck, this is not even the first high-profile cybersecurity incident we had. If you look at the last 5 years, if you take 2021, 2023, there have been 2 incidents. And thus far, if you take those 2 incidents, we have not done much on that, at least in the public light. So that aspect is a cause of concern, simply because, yes, these things do happen. Yes, these things happen in other mature Western countries. These things happen in more affluent countries. However, when it does happen, there is robust governance decisions that are made, robust policy decisions that are made, corrective decisions that are made to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And of course, there is a certain degree of transparency around those incidents, which we haven't seen thus far when it comes to this particular incident. And to be fair, it's not only this incident, so many other cybersecurity incidents that happened before this, it is the same playbook. We get a press release saying that we are investigating the matter, and we never hear about it ever again. And I think that is something we should look inwards and interrogate ourselves, simply because that's not good enough, because we have a stated ambition for statewide digitization in this country. People are looking at that quite hopefully, because obviously the way they interact with the state will change. In order for people to get the buy-in of the people and to trust that process, you must demonstrate to them that your digital infrastructure is resilient. Now, when things like this keep happening, fair enough to the people, they will start questioning the robustness of your infrastructure. So that, in essence, is hindering the government's very ambitious digitization plan, which I support, by the way, which we should have done 10 years ago. However, incidents like this, and where there's no transparency, therein lies the rub and the question. Secondly, you mentioned about investigation, and again point back to the point I made earlier. Generally, when something like this happens, and taking a look at it as an unbiased expert, you don't appoint people within the organization themselves to investigate. Generally, you would at least get SLCERT, who is the state entity looking after cybersecurity. You would get outside experts to come, and you would get people very familiar with digital forensics to do it, because the subject matter warrants people who understand that space, not people who are from an administrative background, because they can't look at it from a clinical point of view and come to conclusions simply because they lack the depth and knowledge to it. So when I saw the initial report of the internal investigation committee, I think my feedback was that should have been a little more technical, should have got involved people cross disciplines, and should have got involved people with cybersecurity investigation and digital forensics background. At least if you don't want to dip into the private sector, there's enough and more academics at least who you could have employed. There are people in CERT you could have taken on. And of course, there are people within the law enforcement system that you could have used.
Let me come back to the delay in disclosure. It took months for this to come to light, and we understand that even the police were not notified initially. The government's explanation is that going public early could have alerted the hackers. But at the same time, this involves public funds, people's money. So how do you assess that decision?
Firstly, if that argument was true, then the Bangladesh Central Bank hack shouldn't have been in public light, no? Secondly, I'd like to take, again, a very different view of it. I mean, how we approach cybersecurity incidents in this country, be it public sector and be it private sector, we have this notion that it must be swept under the carpet. I'm making a general comment here, not specifically for this incident. There are private sector incidents also that are comparable, which the first reaction is always, let's keep it under the hat. And I think we're seeing of that. That comes from not having the maturity to understand how to react to a cybersecurity incident. This is where people like me advocate, listen, this is where your tabletop exercises come in. This is where your drills come in. This is where playbooks come in. And certainly playbooks, if you don't have the playbooks, you can build the playbooks. Because if you see other mature countries, and when people were talking about this, and I made a comment saying, they should disclose certain things. And somebody had asked me on Twitter, should that be the case? And I pointed them to the New Zealand template on how to handle cyber incidents. So the cybersecurity agency has published how organizations should handle the comms of a cybersecurity incident. There is maturity up to that level. Now you don't see that here. And the fact that I think you don't know what to do, and your natural reaction, being any organization in this country, not to disclose, leads to this behavior where you are like, no, we don't want to tell the people. And I'm not even talking about state here. It's state, it's private sector, most organizations. The first reaction is, okay, let's keep it under wraps and let's try to fix it. That does more damage than good, simply because it creates this unnecessary public opinion that you have to deal with then. It creates this unnecessary suspicion on your systems, on your people, on your process, as I mentioned before. And it creates friction that you have to deal with, which is completely irrelevant to the problem that you're dealing with.
Let me ask you this. Given the nature of government systems where multiple senior officials typically have to approve transactions, there's been speculation about whether this could involve some level of internal access. Do you think an incident like this is more likely to involve insider involvement, or could it realistically be carried out entirely by an external actor without any internal knowledge?
I mean, the fact that a central bank of one country, and I refer to the Bangladesh central bank hack, which is quite sophisticated. The threat actors there spent about a year studying that system to execute that particular attack. So it is not unheard of. But I would stop short at blaming anyone, because in the cold light of unbiasedness, I would always err with ignorance rather than malice. Simply because, I mean, yes, it makes better news, I know. But on a scale, I still feel it was ignorance than malice. But again, we don't know enough. So there's a lot of conjecture, as I mentioned. But I point to that, where maybe you didn't understand the gravity of all this. You have to understand, even in the most sophisticated government agencies, people still use their Gmails. There's a very blurred line of official email and personal email. Cybersecurity is an afterthought. There is no pressure on them to make sure that cybersecurity protocols are followed. There are no consequences for cybersecurity protocols not being followed. Whereas in other countries, if you don't, there are consequences, professional consequences. We do not see that here, unless it's very malicious and what we see now. But if, for example, there are organizations, state-level organizations in certain countries, you have to have mandatory phishing tests. And if you don't pass that, you're not allowed to do certain things. Your system access is barred. There's consequences. Where what we don't do is, we are really good at lip service, saying, yes, cybersecurity is important, and we talk about it, we have functions around it, we speak about it in fancy hotels. But the point is, when it comes down to the crux of it, we don't do it. And there's a lot of ignorance around it. And until and unless we attack this ignorance, Lahiru, this will continue to happen. And then we can't turn around and tell people, look, digitization is happening, let's be prepared for that. Until and unless we tackle it, the beast within the system. This is what we need to focus on. Again, you can appoint any committee, you can appoint any fact-finding mission, it's fine. So one of the key things we need to do is to get the Cybersecurity Act running. Now, this is a piece of legislation that has been delayed since 2021. We were told it's coming in 2023, then 24. Now, I think there were announcements made. Hopefully, it's coming this year. That act needs to come, because that act creates a cybersecurity authority. Now, you may ask why we already have CERT. CERT lacks the legal mandate to pressure or enforce cybersecurity practices is any public sector organization, because they lack that legal force. That legal force comes in with the Cybersecurity Act. That needs to come out. Once you do that, you can start mandating state sector organizations to follow cyber security practices. Full stop. Second, the Data Protection Authority. Of course, they've had a stop start. Now the hiring has taken place. The DPA is active. However, they must be told from this day onwards, you are active. You have the legal force to go out and do things, even in public sector organizations. Thirdly, I would mandate, not all, but key government organizations, including the finance ministry as a priority, to follow ISO 27001. That's the baseline cybersecurity certification, ISO certification out there. All the banks in Sri Lanka have to follow that. Why do I say that? Simply because if you follow that, you are subject to an external audit annually. People from outside your organization come and ask you very uncomfortable questions about your cybersecurity. What are your technology practices? What are the tools you have? What are your processes? Are your people trained? People, process, technology. They ask questions around that. Now, if you do those three things, perhaps some of what we discussed can be minimized. Because otherwise, Lahiru, this will continue to happen. And my worry is this. Now it's money. Somewhere down the line, it could be national security. And a bigger tragedy. And I don't want that.
So let me ask you this. We are now seeing several senior officials being suspended pending the inquiry. But this involves the loss of $2.5 million in public funds, reportedly linked to debt servicing. Is this being treated too narrowly as a disciplinary issue? Shouldn't there be a clear criminal dimension to this as well?
Well, in theory, this would fall under the Computer Crimes Act and a penal offense. So, again, listen, I would like a little more seriousness around this, simply because at least that would give a signal to the bureaucracy and anyone else involved that cybersecurity is not something you take lightly. At least that would create lack of better capacity building, at least some sort of fear, uncertainty and doubt around questionable cybersecurity practices, because this is what we're seeing. So certainly, yes, I would also think as a person, it's again not my lane, but a situation of this nature, and if you've seen how other countries deal with that, probably would warrant a little more than an administrative action that is being taken here. I would like to think this falls under the Computer Crimes Act. I would like to think there are other legislative remedies that are out there that can be triggered, which can be looked at quite seriously, because I think we have to show that we are serious, because there are significant international repercussions on this. This is an IMF-supported program. This is part of a bilateral debt settlement. As I mentioned previously, publications of the caliber of Bloomberg have picked this up. So we must signal, at least from optics point of view, if anything else, that we are serious about this, we're investigating this, and this warrants the highest level of attention from whole of government.
Thank you, Asela Waidyalankara. And let's be honest, this isn't just about one breach or one department. This is about competence. It's about accountability. And ultimately, it's about whether the people in charge actually understand the risks they're supposed to be managing. Because if they don't, then incidents like this aren't surprising. They are inevitable. We'll keep asking the questions. Thank you for joining us.